The moment the sun dipped behind the jagged Arizona cliffs, the lonely rancher Luke Marston realized he wasn't alone in the canyon. The whisper of feet behind him was soft, almost gentle, but the strike came like lightning. A blur of braids and painted faces crashed into him, knocking him from his horse before he could even shout. When he hit the ground, the world spun, and the last thing he felt was the sting of a boot heel against his jaw. When he opened his eyes again, he was tied to a wooden post, wrists bound so tightly the rope bit into his skin. A ring of Apache women stood around him. Their eyes held something he couldn't read: fury, caution, something deeper. Their leader stepped forward, a tall woman with obsidian braids and a necklace made of eagle claws. She didn't blink once as she stared at him, as if she were trying to decide whether he was worth keeping alive. Luke tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Dust stuck to his throat. A younger woman approached him and pressed a water skin to his lips. He drank, though he knew better than to trust kindness this early in whatever hell he'd fallen into.
"Why am I here?" he rasped.
"You crossed into our hunting land," the leader said. "You killed one of our deer. You took what was ours. I didn't know—" Silence. Her command cut through him like a blade, but it wasn't fear that froze him. It was the cold realization that these women didn't need blades or guns. Their presence alone was enough to overpower him, and he was entirely at their mercy. Night fell slowly, and as the sky turned black, the wind carried the distant howl of wolves. Luke had heard wolves all his life, but tonight the sound made something crawl up his spine. He couldn't move his hands, couldn't run, couldn't even scratch the itching bite on his shoulder. The Apache women sat around a fire only a few yards away, speaking in low voices he couldn't understand. One of them kept looking at him, not with anger, but with something like curiosity. She was smaller than the others, with a gentle face but a posture that showed she was no less dangerous. She finally rose and walked over to him. "You shouldn't stare at us like prey," she whispered. "I wasn't staring," Luke said. "Just trying to understand why you haven't killed me." "You are a strange man," she said softly. "Most men beg by now. Would it help?" "No, but it would amuse some of them." Her lips curved slightly, not a smile but close. "What's your name?" he asked. "Kalita." "Kalita, will you untie me?" "No, not yet. Maybe not ever." She returned to the fire as the others laughed at a joke he didn't understand. Hours passed. The flames danced shadows across their faces, making their eyes glow like embers. Sleep smothered him eventually, though he fought it. Bound, surrounded, helpless. Sleep was the most dangerous thing he could surrender to. He woke again before dawn. The air was icy, and a thin frost covered the grass around him. But something else woke him, breathing. Warm. Close. He lifted his head slightly and realized Kalita had fallen asleep leaning against the post next to him, her braid coiled in her lap like a sleeping snake. When she woke and saw him staring, she jolted and backed away. "You dream loudly," she muttered. "I wasn't dreaming." "Good," she said, though her cheeks flushed slightly. The leader returned, accompanied by 4 others. "Cut him down." Kalita hesitated but obeyed. The rope fell and Luke dropped to his knees, blood rushing back into his numb arms. Before he could stand, a spear tip pressed against his throat. "You will walk with us," the leader commanded. "If you try to flee, you will never breathe again." They forced him through the desert for miles, stopping only when they reached their hidden village. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Beautiful, built into the cliffs with wooden ladders, hides stretched under woven roofs, colors painted across the stones like ancient stories. Everywhere he looked, women worked, tanning hides, weaving baskets, grinding maize. No man, not a single one. He swallowed hard. Kalita noticed his reaction. "You understand now," she whispered. "This is not a place where men come willingly." "What happens to them?" he whispered. "That depends on the man." Before he could ask more, they shoved him into a small enclosure made of branches and leather. It wasn't exactly a cage, but it felt like one. Days passed. They fed him, watched him, studied him. Luke did what he could to stay calm, stay respectful, stay alive. Every time he tried to speak to the leader, she ignored him. But Kalita, she stayed close. Sometimes she brought food. Sometimes she brought water. Sometimes she only watched him, as if searching for something inside him he didn't fully understand. Once she touched his arm where the rope had burned him. Her fingers were cool and careful. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Not anymore. You heal quickly. I've had worse." She didn't move her hand right away. When she finally did, she stepped back fast, as if she had crossed a line she didn't know how to uncross. That night, Luke felt eyes on him. Several women sat outside his enclosure, whispering about him. He could tell by the way they kept glancing in his direction, their faces lit by the fire. Some of them looked impressed, others confused. One or two looked downright interested. The next morning, the leader approached him with a blade in her hand. Luke tensed reflexively. "Stand," she commanded. He obeyed. She cut the hide ties, holding the enclosure together, and motioned for him to step out. "You have been judged," she said, "and a choice has been made." "What choice?" "You will stay with us." Luke blinked. "As what?" The women behind her murmured, some excited, some annoyed. "As a man who owes us a life debt," the leader said. "You will work. You will respect our ways. You will learn our language. And you will not try to leave." Luke swallowed. "And if I refuse?" "Then we return you to the desert, bound without water." He didn't need time to think. "I'll stay." The leader nodded and stepped aside. Khalida approached him, holding a folded piece of clothing made of soft buckskin. "You will wear this," she said. "Our way, not yours." He took the garment and followed her to a stream behind the village. She turned her back while he changed into the simple, handmade clothing. When he stepped into the sunlight again, she looked him over with a startled expression she tried and failed to hide. "You look," she cleared her throat, "different." "Good different?" he asked. She scowled, embarrassed. "Do not ask such things." Life in the village was strange at first. Luke's hands were strong from ranch work. They put him to hauling water, carrying logs, repairing fences. The women watched him constantly. Some admired him. Some tested him. Some teased him. He never felt unsafe exactly, but he always felt observed. One evening, as the fire crackled and the sky turned violet, two women approached him boldly. "You are strong," one said, circling him. "Stronger than the others we have captured." "You have good hands," another added, touching his shoulder. "Maybe you stay forever." Luke stepped back awkwardly. I'm just here to work off a debt." They laughed softly, exchanging amused glances. "You do not know how quickly hearts change here," one whispered. Days turned into weeks. Luke learned their ways, how they hunted, how they tracked, how they cooked maize with herbs that tasted like smoke and earth. The women began to speak to him not with suspicion, but with warmth. He saved a child from falling into the cliff crevice one afternoon, catching the girl by the wrist just before she slipped into darkness. The entire village gathered around him afterward, touching his arms, murmuring thanks, whispering that the spirits must have guided his hands. But nothing changed more than his bond with Khalida. She trained him to understand their language. He helped her carry wood. She told him the story of how their tribe lost their men years ago to a brutal raid, and how the women had survived alone since then, refusing to bow to anyone. One night, as they repaired a broken water jar together, she paused and looked at him. "You are not like other men," she said softly. "You say that like it's a problem." "It is the reason you are still alive." He laughed. "And what reason is that?" She didn't answer at first. Then, with a rare boldness, she whispered, "Because too many here are beginning to care for you." Luke froze. The fire popped behind them, sparks rising into the dark. "Khalida," he whispered. She stood quickly. "I said too much." She began to walk away, but he caught her hand lightly. Not enough to restrain, only enough to ask her to stay. "Khalida, do you care?" he asked. She turned, eyes shining in the firelight. "Yes," she breathed. "Too much." Before he could say another word, shouting erupted from the far side of the village. A scout rushed in, panting. "Riders!" she cried. "White men, armed!" Panic rippled through the tribe. Women grabbed bows, knives, spears. Luke stood frozen for a heartbeat, his people coming for him. His chance at freedom. Khalida grabbed his arm. "Hide. If they see you here with us, they will kill us all." "Khalida, they're my people. Will they show mercy to us?" she demanded. "Will they leave us standing?" The truth cut through him like a blade. "No," he whispered. She shoved him behind a row of clay jars. "Stay, do not move." Gunshots cracked in the distance. Horses thundered. Luke clenched his jaw. He couldn't just hide. He couldn't let these women who had spared him, fed him, trusted him, be slaughtered. He grabbed a fallen spear. When the riders stormed into the clearing, Luke leaped from hiding and slammed the spear into the ground beside them, shouting, "Turn back! Leave them alone!" The men reeled in shock. "Luke, what the hell?" "They saved my life," he roared. "You harm them, you go through me." The riders hesitated, but the Apache women didn't. Arrows flew past Luke, hitting the ground near the horses' hooves, driving the men back. More came from the cliffs, surrounding the intruders until they fled into the night. When silence returned, Kalita ran to Luke. She wasn't trembling, she was furious. "You could have died," she whispered. "So could you. That is different." "How?" he asked. Her voice softened. "Because your death would break many hearts here." She wasn't talking about the others. She was talking about herself. She lifted her hand and touched his cheek lightly. For the first time since he'd been captured, he touched her hand in return. The village watched silently, some smiling, some whispering, all recognizing what had happened without a single word having to be spoken. Luke had been captured, but now he didn't want to leave. And for the first time in his lonely life, he understood why the heart follows no law, no border, no land. It follows only the one who reaches for it, and he had won every heart in the Apache women's tribe, but none more deeply than Kalita's.